We do touch on some heavy topics, and you can always check the description for more details on this episode. The Turtz podcast and content in this episode is presented solely for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. Neither I nor my guests are healthcare or mental health care providers, and we are not licensed or authorized to provide professional medical advice. For more information, please see our policy at TURTZED.com.
A blind date from two Kates created a love destined in fate. And from what I can tell, this quote is a Jack trait. You don't know what hand you're going to be dealt next. You learn to take life as it comes at you to make each day count. Jack, welcome to Turtz.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
When I first saw your videos, it resonated with me from my own lived experience with losing my grandparents. And what you were sharing really was your inner thoughts and a very authentic version. And I'm so glad that we can sit down and dive more into your story and your and Jack's story.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here and excited to get down to it.
So with everything, I like to start from the beginning. So I would just be curious what your dating life was like before you even met Jack.
So I was 23. I had just graduated college, and my dating life wasn't great. I don't know. I was going on dates. There were a few guys I'd met that I liked that, didn't have the same feelings for me. So I think I was feeling pretty discouraged at that point. And I dated a bit in college, but never anything super serious. So I was feeling pretty discouraged. And then Jack kind of came out of nowhere and changed my life.
A blind date.
A blind date.
What were your thoughts when you were getting set up on this blind date?
Yeah. So my friend Kate, I'm from St. Louis, and Kate's from St. Louis. She went to college with Jack at Lehigh, and she had a friend there who was also named Kate, who my Kate brought to my birthday party, my 23rd birthday. And the two Kates came up to me later in the night and said, would you ever date someone with the same name? And it had never crossed my mind that could be a possibility. But I said, sure. They showed me his Instagram. They said, he's this great guy. He just came out recently. Would you be willing to meet him? So of course I said yes. I was looking at his photos. I thought he looked cute, but going into it, I wasn't sure, does he just need a friend? Is this going to be romantic? Mm-hmm. So I wasn't sure what to expect. And then when we did meet up on that first date, I kind of instantly started falling for him. And I was sitting there thinking, oh God, he's so great. There's no way he's going to like me back. And partway through the date, I think that shifted and I started to realize, oh wait, I think he's into me too. And we sat there for 3 hours at Finnerty's in the East Village, and it was an instant connection. And he asked to walk me home, and we shared a kiss on 2nd Avenue outside my apartment, and the rest is history.
It's so wonderful that you were able to feel that connection partway through the date and feel it mirrored back to you. In the beginning stages of dating, what was it about Jack or the relationship that felt different to you compared to the other guys you had dated?
He was an open book. You always knew what he was feeling and what he was thinking. And it was that way with me from moment one. I realized this guy isn't playing games. He's being very genuine. He's telling me exactly how he feels. So there was something that felt very safe about being with him. And I just felt like we were on the same page, from that first night. Mm-hmm. And it was communication. He couldn't hide his feelings. And I was grateful for it because it made me feel confident in what we had, from very early on.
And when you were in those beginning stages of dating, or even before dating Jack, what did you have in your mind as a relationship you were looking for?
It wasn't Jack. He wasn't the person I ever envisioned myself with. He was so much better. And we were very different. He loved EDM. I like show tunes. On paper, we didn't make much sense.
But you both had the name Jack.
But we did share a name. Good point. He wasn't the person I ever saw myself with, but he was the exact person I needed. Mm-hmm. And he taught me, how to relax and enjoy life more, how to live in the moment. I already forgot the question as I started talking about him, but I hope I answered it.
Yeah, it was, I think it's so interesting how they say opposites can attract. Mm-hmm. And as you described it, there was such a nice balance between you two with the show tunes versus EDM, or just him pulling you out of that comfort zone. It seems like when you were dating the beginning stages, did you think about your future, or did that come up in conversation in terms of what you both wanted? I think as gay men, there's lots of variations of what a relationship could look like.
Definitely. I think very early on, we both realized we wanted to be committed to each other. And I think we both told each other we loved each other after 2 weeks. And I think we were both all in and were committed and knew we wanted to spend the rest of our lives with one person. Sorry.
It's okay.
I think very early on, we both realized we were on the same page. We both wanted to spend the rest of our lives together. And I remember a few weeks after we started dating, I was introducing him to a friend of mine. And of course, she fell madly in love with him quickly and was like, this guy's so great, don't mess it up. And I remember saying to her, if I mess this up with him, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. Like, I just knew early on he was the person I wanted to be with. And I wasn't afraid to say that. And he wasn't afraid to say it. So from very early on, we talked about a future together. We talked about, maybe having kids one day. But I'm grateful that we didn't waste much time in our relationship. And we weren't afraid to have those conversations at a, early stage.
As you've shared your story with grief, you've been so authentic about it. And I think that's what resonated for me and why I wanted to have this conversation. And also, I think, resonated for so many other people, both for your love story, for relating to grief and loss. And because of that authenticity, people wanting to listen and tune in and support you. And I think that really mirrors the relationship that you had with Jack in a lot of ways. That authenticity from day one, saying exactly what's going on, sharing things that are going well and things that you're struggling with. And that, I think, is what really builds a lot of connection, both between two people, but as we've seen through your experience, which we'll talk about in a minute, just a community online.
Absolutely.
When you went through grief and loss, there's so much unknown, and there's so much that we don't understand. But also, we know the history with a person and how much we cared for them. When you started your journey of healing, there were a few years before you started posting on TikTok. What did that journey look like for you in the beginning stages?
Yeah, it was dark. When initially, right after Jack passed, I couldn't envision my life without him. I had this future mapped out with him that I had to let go of. And I think the first year, was getting through the first birthday without him, our first anniversary, our wedding date, we had planned our wedding. So getting through all those firsts was very difficult. But each one, I think, kind of helped me let go of this future that I had planned and hoped for. But yeah, the first year, I think I was really just in shock and going through the motions. And I remember, thinking after he passed, I don't know about you, but I know some people in my life who, have been through something tragic, and you look at them and you think, oh, they were never the same. And I just remember I would sit there and think, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be someone that people look at and think, oh, that happened to him and he never recovered. So I remember making the choice, I'm not going to let the death of Jack define my life, but I want how I respond to it to be my defining moment. And it's taken me a while to get to this point where I, was ready to share it with the world and talk about it, but it's still an ongoing process, and I'm still healing, and I still have good days and bad days. And I think what I've learned is that, the grief doesn't go away, but you grow around it, you learn to carry it. And I've found that to be true. They say time helps, and I think time helps you learn how to carry it, but it doesn't make it go away. And so, so it's been a long road, and I'm still on it.
that moment is so profound of making a choice and deciding that while this will always be part of your life, it doesn't have to define your life. It may change the way you think about things at times. It may change your decisions at times, but it doesn't have to be the definition. And I think that is something, whether we're grieving the loss of someone or struggling interpersonally with depression or a difficult work situation, the fact that you were able to say, this is an experience and I'm willing to put in the work to go on that healing journey is so profound. And I think, as you said, it doesn't ever end. And I think that even in itself also is so profound, because a lot of times we look for that moment where we say, okay, I've healed, right? Like if you cut yourself and you get a paper cut, you know, it heals, it scabs, and the scab falls off and it's healed essentially. But that's not always the case. And I think that view is really important that you shared of, you've learned that it is a piece of who you are and it's a piece of your journey. But it goes back to not defining you. So I thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. And one thing I'd like to add, I remember in that first year thinking, oh, once I hit the 1 year mark, I'm going to feel better. Like something magical is going to occur on that day. But in your mind, it's like you're just barreling towards that 1 year mark. And I thought, oh, things are going to be so much easier. And then I hit the 1 year mark and nothing changed. Yeah. So the second year I found to be more difficult than the first, because the shock had worn off, it had settled in. And I realized, oh, I'm just going to feel this way forever. Yeah. You know, it's not going anywhere. So that was the year that I learned, okay, how do I live with this and how do I manage it? And so the second year definitely was harder than the first.
When you go through that first year and there's the year of firsts, it's hard because you're waiting for something to change, as you've said.
Right.
The second year sounds hard because you actually put in the work to choose a different path. What did the work look like for you during that second year?
I went to therapy. I found a great grief psychologist who I'm still seeing regularly, and he helped me navigate it. I don't think I could have done it on my own. And then, just the support of friends and family. I'm grateful that I'm very close. Jack had a twin sister, Charlotte, and we would text each other every morning, a little check-in. And, people grieve differently. And we had two very different kinds of loss. I had lost my partner. She had lost her twin brother, someone she had never spent a moment of her life without. And yet somehow, miraculously, we were kind of on the same page throughout our grief in those first 2 years and really were able to lean on each other. And I've heard stories from other people who felt isolated because, their spouse or their child, whoever it is in their life, they were grieving so differently. So I look back and I'm so grateful that I had that person who it just seemed like we were in it together. And she really helped me through and still does. So the support of family and friends, therapy, and then just giving myself grace, meeting myself where I was every day and not forcing myself to feel good or do things I didn't want to do. And when I needed a day to rot on my couch, I let myself have it. So it was just, learning to check in with myself. I think that really helped.
Something you said in the beginning about you and Jack being very different and the way that you guys both approach the world. When you think about your healing journey, what pieces of what you learned from Jack helped bring you through that?
Everything. I look back and I was the one who was always worried about things. And I used to think, oh, I'm the old soul in the relationship and he's the new soul. And I'm always taking care of him, getting us places on time, making sure he has the right clothes for whatever. I really felt like I was taking care of everything. And when I look back and I think of Jack, I think, wow, here I was thinking I had it all figured out. And yet he was the one focused on what really mattered in life and who was living in every moment and wasn't worrying about the stupid stuff. And so I've tried the last few years to try to live that way and only worry about the things that matter, to let go of the things that are outside of my control and to just make the most of each day, because that's what he did. And I think grief just gives you an entirely new perspective on life. And that's the gift of grief, I think, because everything in life is temporary. I've learned that to be unfortunately true. But so when things are bothering me at work, if things aren't going my way, I don't let it really get to me. I'm able to compartmentalize it because I know this is going to be over in a week, So learning that everything is fleeting, that includes the bad things. Unfortunately, it includes the good. But I think that perspective has just made me a calmer person. And it's made my days more enjoyable.
When you think about first sharing your grief journey on TikTok, my first question is, what would Jack have said?
Yeah.
He saw you posting
He
your
probably would be
innermost
like,
thoughts.
put your phone away. What are you doing? No. Well, he loved Twitter. He posted tweets every day. He was always writing jokes on Twitter. So he did enjoy posting thoughts online. So I like to keep that in mind. That being said, I think he would have laughed at me the first time I recorded a selfie video on my walk. And I was laughing at myself. I was embarrassed at first. I felt like, who am I to do this? What do I have to share? But something within me, I just felt the need to do it. And I did it for myself at first. It's year 3 of the grief, and I feel as if I don't want to be a burden on my friends and family. And yet I still have so much I feel like I need to process every day. My mom would call me and say, how's your day going? And I knew if I told her how I was really doing, it would ruin her day. So I was keeping it to myself. And for some reason, I decided to turn to the internet and tell it to strangers. And I'm so glad I did, because very quickly, other widowers and widows and people grieving children and pets started chiming in and sharing their grief with me and sharing those moments each day. And then they started asking about Jack. Initially I wasn't sharing my own personal story. It was more just grief in general. But once I started having a few followers asking questions, it compelled me to share about Jack. And that's when things really took off.
That's such an interesting aspect of the internet, where you can be alone and you can share your innermost thoughts, and also it builds community at the same time. And there are so many people out there, including myself, that have gone through grief, and I've struggled to talk about it at times because there's no timeline for it, and everyone grieves differently and everyone goes through things differently. And also, even watching some of your videos, as I told you before we started, like, I got a little teary-eyed on the train because there's such an authenticity to it. And that's really what builds the community. I think the more that we share, the more community we actually build. It's not the opposite. We shouldn't keep things inside, because we actually get more connection through that. What was it like building that community that may not even be in the country, let alone in New York City?
It's been incredible. The best part of all of this has been hearing from other people. People are sending me messages saying that they went through a similar loss. Those are the ones that blow me away the most, because when I lost Jack, it just felt like the worst thing that could possibly happen did. And I felt so alone in it, because it's so out of order to lose someone at 30 years old. And now I'm getting stories, almost every day, of people who lost a partner at a young age or in a tragic way. And it's made me feel less alone. So the messages from other people have been incredible to read. And then the other beautiful thing is, in the comments on my videos, people will start sharing their stories of who they're missing. And then other people are coming in and commenting and lifting them up. So it really has created this beautiful space that has restored my faith in humanity. Who'd have ever thought that TikTok could be a place to uplift each other? So it's really been mind-blowing to me, and I'm continued to be blown away by it and shocked, honestly.
I think every tool, TikTok in this case, there's always a benefit and there's always a negative. And I think that finding the ways to use all of these tools for positivity, and in this case, connection, is so important. And as you said, this is not something that you thought other people would understand or have gone through, because it is out of order. It's not something that it's commonly talked about. And here's an entire community of people that have gone through it or are just empathetic to where you are today. And I'd love you to share a little bit more about the bench, but I think the bench is a perfect example of that, where it's bringing sort of a virtual reality of TikTok into real life.
Absolutely. So I proposed to Jack on a bench in Hudson River Park, and I had a plaque made that said, "Jack, will you marry me? Love, Jack." And we had a beautiful night there. He was totally surprised, and it was perfect. And I thought that bench would be a place where we would go for the rest of our lives and, remember that night. But shortly after he died, I thought of the bench and I thought, oh God, how am I ever going to go back to that bench? Mm-hmm. And then I started receiving photos from friends who were going to the bench after Jack passed and leaving flowers or saying, "Oh, I stopped here and prayed for Jack." And I was so moved by that. And it kind of compelled me to go to the bench for the first time on my own. And I went there, and instead of crying, I found it to be very peaceful. It's in this beautiful setting. It's on the water. He loved the water. And I realized, oh, this is my happy place. Mm. This is my place to go and remember Jack. So I quickly came up with an idea to change the plaque out to memorialize him. And I've used a quote from one of his favorite movies, Never Been Kissed. The quote was, "Find out who you are and try not to be afraid of it." Mm-hmm. And I chose it because he loved the movie and because it's how he lived his life. Jack always said that once he came out and started living authentically, everything else in his life fell into place. Mm-hmm. He met me. He found his dream job. And so I thought that's a message he'd want people to see when they saw his name and walked by the bench. And then I posted about the bench on TikTok. And next thing I knew, I was receiving photos from strangers, going to the bench. And then when I returned to the bench for the first time, I was approached by multiple people who recognized me and said, "Oh, we're visiting from out of town and wanted to see the bench." And that's been the biggest shock to me, is that this thing, it felt, you can see that, 10 million people have viewed something, but it doesn't feel tangible or real when it's mm-hmm. on TikTok. So then to experience that in real life, and every day when I go to the bench, at least one person stops and has seen the video and wants to say hi. And that has been just completely overwhelming. And it fills me with so much gratitude and comfort. And I love that all these people are taking time out of their life to go there and think about Jack. And so getting to share him with the world in this way has been the best part of it. And, when you lose someone, you want the whole world to stop and grieve with you. And that's truly what it's felt like is happening the past few weeks. Mm. And so I'm just very grateful.
I love that it brings TikTok to real life. Mm-hmm. And as you said, a video can have 10 million, 10,000 or 100 million views. It doesn't matter about the number. There's still a barrier. There's still a phone-to-phone barrier that doesn't break often. Mm-hmm. And for you, there is a very specific place that is so important to you and is so important to your story. And to have people go there is just so beautiful. And also be able to share that moment with you. And for everyone, it can mean something different. But as you said, the support of just one person a day recognizing that this was important to you is something that I don't think many people ever realize, and not realize, but comes to fruition in life. And It's so beautiful that it's a memorial to someone that was so important to you and changed your life in so many ways.
Thank you. Yeah.
When you first got approached at the bench, what was that like for you?
I kind of turned to my friends and I was like, how much did you pay this person? I didn't believe it at first. Because still, it's just, as I said, the fact that people are taking time out of their life mm-hmm. to come here and honor Jack and that they were so moved by our story, it's really hard to accept. But it's so comforting. And I felt better the last 6 weeks than I have since he passed, because I really am feeling lifted up and supported by so many people. Friday, I was having a particularly bad day, and I went to the bench, and there were two girls from North Carolina who introduced themselves to me, and like it turned my day around. It's truly incredible, and the kindness of strangers, the fact that these people I don't know are going out of their way to support me and show me love is so beautiful, and it's just hard to believe.
I also love that you changed out the plaque. That quote goes well beyond a single person or a movie. It's something that so many people can relate to. When Jack was living his authentic life, everything fell into place. There's something mirrored in your grief journey of that as well, where when you started sharing authentically and how those pieces fell into place. You've shared so much through TikTok and your daily journey with grief. As a writer, how has that worked, no pun intended, itself into your writing?
So shortly after Jack passed, I went back to work at Blue Bloods on CBS, and I think it fully impacted the stories I was choosing to pitch to my boss. And I remember one in particular was about, in the series. The series begins with Tom Selleck losing one of his sons, who's a cop, and here we were in season 14, and I just felt as if we don't always spend time dealing with this family's grief of that loss of their son. So one of the last episodes I did revolved around the son they lost and them coming together at the end of that episode for dinner at one of his favorite restaurants to honor him. And it was something little that, we were able to work into an episode, but it was something I'm so proud of and that was so meaningful for me. But also just working on a cop show in general. Every episode deals with, someone being murdered and someone's dealing with grief. So I think I was surprised how often I found myself writing about grief because I didn't anticipate being able to channel so much into Blue Bloods, but I really feel like I did and was able to, and it was helpful for me. And now Blue Bloods has ended and I'm working on my own writing, and it's all I want to write about. I feel like I have this story to tell that I need to tell, and it's still the first thing on my mind when I wake up in the morning and the last thing before I go to bed. And so I think that this will impact everything I write for the rest of my life.
It's hard to dive into. I know when I first started the podcast and was writing my story, it was hard to relive some of the more difficult moments and share them for the first time with people. And also, it was freeing in some ways as well, because I was able to talk about it for the first time and share it, which obviously you've done on TikTok. And also, that authenticity is what will make that work so powerful. You've already done that with what you've shared on TikTok and the community you've built in a very short period of time with being authentic. Being authentic is the most important thing, and the other pieces fall into place. So I look forward to seeing what you write and how it impacts that future writing.
Thank you.
What do you think has been the most surprising aspect of sharing your story beyond the virality of TikTok, like for you personally?
I think the response from my family and friends, thankfully, I didn't tell anyone I was doing this. I kind of, posted to TikTok knowing that none of my close friends or family used it. So when I noticed that the one video had gone viral, I thought, oh gosh, I hope Jack's family doesn't mind. I hope his sister doesn't mind. And thankfully, they all were moved by it as well and couldn't believe the response and found comfort in it like I did, that people were talking about Jack, and it really made him feel alive again. So the biggest surprise, not that I'm surprised by it, but I'm so happy and grateful for it, was that his family found comfort in it, that my family did as well. And then also, I've said to other people before now how I turned to TikTok because I didn't want to burden my people. And every person that loves me that's heard that has said, what are you talking about? Like, of course, you can always be honest with us. So it's opened up a new dialogue, I think, with my friends and family, where we're talking about Jack a bit more again and talking about our grief more, because we'd gotten to the point where it wasn't, the focus of every conversation. And not that it needs to be that, but it's opened up the dialogue again with everyone. And I think it was a reminder for all of us that we still need to talk about it. Yeah. So I think that's been the best thing that's come out of all this.
Two things popped into my mind. I think the first was you're talking about it differently. You're not talking about it in the same way as you described the way that you would have talked about it in the first year or even the second year. As you go into this third year, there's a piece of it of there is understanding behind it. There is wanting to share the story for both you, but to help other people who may be struggling and don't have the same support system. And the second piece is seeing that they also wanted to have that conversation. And I think it's so often that we feel like there's an expiration date on it, on grief, and it can come up in so many different ways. And also, you never know what someone else is going through. And by sharing this in such a way that you didn't think they would see it, having them see it and having it open up that conversation is so beautiful, because it, as you said, brings his energy back to the conversation, but as you've also described, in a different way.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's truly felt like he's alive again. Just having strangers asking questions about him and getting to know him. That's been so moving. And I wish he were here to see all this, but at the same time, I feel like he knows and he played a hand in all of it. So I feel him with me when I make the videos every day. I really do.
What do you wish people knew about Jack that they may not know?
It's a great question. He was really funny. He had this incredible sense of humor. He always had a huge smile on his face. And, I say he's a hard person to grieve because he was never sad. He was so happy, and every memory is full of laughter. So he was just this bright, bright light. And I do think that's shining through in some of the stuff I've, shared. But his sense of humor was really killer. Yeah.
Right as you said that, I was thinking it definitely comes through. And it was so interesting that that's where you started, where he's there with you in those moments. I'd love it if you were open to sharing a little bit more about feeling like he's there and the connection to Cherries.
Absolutely. So I was raised Catholic. I've always believed in heaven, or at least I thought I did. I think looking back, I thought that the afterlife or heaven was all just wishful thinking. But then I lost Jack, and I have felt his presence in my life almost every day. And it's shifted everything I believe. And, energy never dies, it transforms. And so whatever you believe, I do believe his energy is still here and it's still with me. And in terms of the Cherries, so I was given the book Signs by Laura Lynn Jackson. And in the book, she talks about, you don't have to wait for your person to send you signs. You can ask for them. And her example was oranges. How she had asked for someone to send her oranges, and then she went to a speaking engagement and there was a big vase full of oranges. So I was reading that the same day I was in St. Louis visiting a tree that a friend had dedicated in Jack's honor. And the tree was a cherry tree. So I thought, oh, okay, oranges, I'll ask for cherries. And an hour later, I was back at my parents' house. My nephew was playing in the backyard, and I went out to get him. And he picked something up off the ground, and he said, "Look, Jack, it's cherries." And I was just shocked. It had only been an hour since I'd had that thought in my mind, please send me cherries. So I went inside and I said, "Mom, do we have a cherry tree?" And she said no. She'd never found cherries in the yard before that, hasn't found them since. But from that moment on, I started seeing cherries everywhere. And at important moments when I needed something from Jack, I feel like cherries appear. So cherries have become such a comfort for me, and a way that I feel Jack connects with me. But there have been a lot of other signs too. And And I believe if you look for them, you'll find them.
Mm. The idea of just being open to it, right? Like it wasn't necessarily what you believed as a kid. It may not have been something you believed in as an adult either, but being open to a sign and just saying, let's see what happens, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think why not be open to it? You know, and I'm sure some people will listen to that and think, oh, you know, that's they're just lying to themselves or something. But let me have it. And I wish for you that you could open your mind to it, because I really believe that we get what we give. And if you open your heart and your mind to these things, I really think it can bring you comfort as well.
Well, and to those people, I'd say, who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I think for me, there have been moments where I have been really struggling, and it's not always necessarily been grief. Sometimes it's anxiety. Sometimes it's extreme stress, or I've had some health issues, and I just need a moment of comfort, and it can be a split second. And for me, it wasn't necessarily a cherry, and it's more of a license plate thing. But I remember vividly that there was a day where I was really struggling, and I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing, and I have no idea like how to work through this. And I was like, I really just need a hug right now. And the car that pulled in front of me had a license plate that said hug.
Oh.
And you can chalk it up to a coincidence. You can chalk it up to a probability of like all the letters and numbers. But I think in that moment, and as you said, you know, within an hour of that happening, there's something so comforting about any type of connection that can be there. Coincidence or not, you and I are not going to be the judge and jury on that.
Right.
But being open to it gives you, and I'd be curious if you felt this way as well, a second to breathe, just to take a deep breath and say, I don't know how, I don't know why, but I will take it.
I will take it and let it comfort you. You know, who cares if it was a coincidence or not? If it brought you comfort in that moment and helped lift you out of what you were struggling with, then that's a beautiful thing that we should all, you know, celebrate and grab onto. So thank you for sharing. That was beautiful.
As we talk more about this, you've mentioned his humor a few times. I would love to know, what was the thing that you two would just laugh about, that even to this day, when you see it, like there's just an overwhelming sense of laughter between the two of you?
Okay, this is so stupid, but it's the first thing that came to mind. Jack had a real issue with the Minions. I don't know why. But the Minions, I don't even think he ever saw one of the movies, okay? But I guess one of the movies was being promoted very heavily one summer, and a lot of like adults, you know, were posting about the Minions or dressing as Minions. And he was like, what are these people doing? Like, he just didn't get the attraction to the Minions and the obsession with the Minions. And they just irked him for no good reason. And he would get so worked up about it. And so whenever I see a Minion, that makes me laugh, because I know that he'd be annoyed. And it's so dumb and stupid, and he had no right to be annoyed by them. The Minions are great. But yeah, he had an issue with Minions. So that's one little thing that comes to mind.
I think sometimes when we're talking about these things, like there's a sense of humor that has to come through in grief. I think the laughter can be very relieving. I have a very dark sense of humor, and in times of difficulty, I typically go towards that dark sense of humor. With his humor being such a big piece of the way that you remember him, how has that played a role in your grieving process?
Well, one thing that comes to mind are his tweets, especially in the early days when I was missing him. I'd go back and read through his Twitter. You know, I'd read, 20 tweets, and it felt like I was sitting there with him, listening to him crack a joke. So his Twitter account, now X, brought me a lot of comfort and still does. And it's, I find I hadn't looked at it in a while, but I went back and read through a few this past week. And that's been one way I feel like I can connect to his humor. And I'm so grateful that he tweeted as much as he did, even though it annoyed me at the time. I'm like, thank God for his Twitter. So that's one way that I feel like I'm able to connect with his humor and have a moment of levity when I need it.
I love that there's an archive of his Twitter.
Yeah, I know.
It's like a journey through that. And I think as a writer, it's so poetic that he was big on these 140 character tweets,
Right.
and it can tell a whole story.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's funny when you read them, I can hear him saying it, you know, he captured his own voice very well. So yeah, it's very comforting.
When you think about the grieving process and the healing journey you've been on, there may have been things that didn't necessarily have to do with Jack, but have been healed through this process, or things that you didn't know were there that were healed, and just healing in general. What have you learned about yourself over the last 3 years? And it doesn't have to be one thing.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the day after Jack died, my friend Colin was over at my house, and he asked me, what do you do now that you didn't before you met Jack? And without skipping a beat, I said, love myself. And it's something I hadn't realized, and I'm so glad he asked me that. But Jack taught me to love myself. He taught me that I'm worthy of love, you know, that someone as incredible as him wanted to spend their life with me. You know, he gave me a confidence in myself that I never had. And that's, I think, the greatest gift he gave me. And that's something I've held on to. And now as I, you know, begin navigating dating again and trying to think of a future again, and, you know, it hasn't been going well. So all those voices start to pop into my head again. And I think back to Jack and I don't know. He taught me that I'm worthy, and that is the greatest gift you can give anyone. And that's something that I'm grateful for every day. And it's something that's at the center of my mind. I deserve to be happy. I deserve to find love again. And I know he'd want me to. And, I'm never going to settle for less, you know?
I'm taking a deep breath
Yeah,
so I don't cry, because I think when you think about grieving, or at least when I think about grieving, being able to look at such a positive thing, such as the love that you have for yourself, and be able to understand that nothing in life lasts forever, but that will. That feeling that you can go back to when dating is difficult and hard, and it's a whole new world, but that peace is such a gift. And I think that it can be so difficult to point to something and say, this person changed my life and helped me to understand who you are authentically, helped you to be able to share that. And also something that you can hold with you is just so beautiful in your story with Jack.
Thank you. No, it really is. And I'm grateful that I'm grateful my friend Colin asked me that question when he did, you know, on day 2 of my life without Jack, that thought came into my head, and that has been, you know, present every day since. I'm just so grateful for it.
I have one more question, and I'm asking it as a follow-up question, partially selfishly, because I think for me, I've been through my own journey, not with grief, but with looking at getting back into the dating world and being able to talk about some of the more heavier things that I've been through in my life while they're live and living on a podcast. Not everyone's going to listen, right? As you look at dating, and for those who have been through grief or something else that has deeply impacted their life, what has it been like for you to navigate the balance of the two while this is a very big part of your life, figuring out when and where to share that information and in dating?
It's very difficult. You know, I went on a few dates last year, and the first few were from Hinge, and the person I was meeting did not know my history. And so it was tough trying to decide when to share it or not share it. And I went in thinking, oh, I'm not going to talk about this, But then, you're on a date, someone's asking you questions about your life. And I felt like I was lying with every answer by omitting Jack from my life, So I sat there and felt like I lied all night. And then towards the end of the date, the guy said, oh, well, you said you're new to Hinge. Why is that? Are you coming out of a relationship? And once he asked it so specifically, I was like, okay, I've got to say it now. So I shared, that I'd been engaged and lost my partner. And the guy said something like, I could tell it took him aback, which understandably so. And he was very nice about it. But he did say, like, don't worry, I've been trauma dumped on before. And I was just like, oh, God, I guess that is kind of what I did here. But after that, I was so discouraged. I'm like, how am I ever going to go on a date again? And then I had a few that were setups, and those were more comfortable because I knew the person coming in, was aware of the story. And then recently, thanks to TikTok, I feel like hopefully I'm just never going to have to share it again because I feel like everyone knows now, or at least, if I do go on another date, that person will probably Google me before the date. That's what I do. I like to Google the person. So I'm hopeful that I just never have to explain it again. So we'll see.
Another benefit of sharing.
Another benefit of sharing on TikTok. Exactly.
With everything that we talked about today, what is the message that you want to leave people with?
The message I'd like to leave everyone with is that no one is alone. Grief can be very isolating. I know it was for me, despite having, an incredible support system around me. It still felt like you're the only person in the world that feels this way. And the one thing that I have, learned the past 6 weeks is that we are all in this together. None of us get through life unscathed. We're all going to lose someone we love. And we need to help each other through it and talk about it more.
Yeah. What is something that someone has told you that has impacted your life and you'll never forget?
It was the best advice I was given about grieving. And it was shortly after Jack died, a family friend. She texted me and she just said, all you can do right now is let yourself feel everything, the good and the bad. And I took that to heart. And I feel like, especially in the early days, if I was sad, I let myself be sad. If I wanted to cry, I let myself cry. If I found a slight moment of joy, I let myself have it. So just, that's what I tell people when they've newly lost someone now. Let yourself feel and listen to yourself, and don't push anything down because it'll find its way up eventually.
It always bubbles up.
It always bubbles up.
That is a great piece of advice.
Yeah, it's simple, but it helps.
I'm going to ask one more. What is something that Jack told you that impacted your life and you'll never forget?
Wow. That's a great question. He told me he loved me. And that's something that I'll have for the rest of my life. And it's something that has changed my life. And I'm very grateful for it.
Thank you for sharing so much today and being open with your story and Jack's story and the optimism you have of what you've been through, processing it and understanding that the impact that it has on you is going to be part of your life and it doesn't have to define your life. But he forever changed you for the good. And I love that is the piece that you'll never forget.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And with the final question, I turn the tables and you can ask me anything that you want.
So you touched on this earlier. You mentioned your grandparents. And my question to you was going to be, who were you grieving? And so if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to hear a little about your grandparents.
It's interesting. I think what you said earlier was really impactful because I don't talk about them as much as I think about them. And there was a moment maybe 2 weeks ago where we're cleaning out some old DVDs and trying to figure out what's on every VHS and DVD. And my grandparents had converted these old DVDs or these old tapes. I can only imagine how old the film was into DVDs. And it brought back so many memories. It brought back the memories of going to their house every single Wednesday. My grandparents cutting those week trips short to be 6 days to make sure that they were back in time to spend the day with the grandkids. And being there to listen and never judge and really be a support system of unconditional love. And as you were talking about it today, I realized part of the reason I don't talk about it as much, I think, based on the tears that are welling up in my eyes, I can say safely yes. It can be really hard. And it's also making me realize how much you are giving when you talk about grieving on TikTok. And I love the way that my grandmother and I used to laugh. Like, we would laugh. When I was 6 months old, I could just look at her from the crib, like trying to go to bed, and she would just burst into laughter, and I would burst into laughter. And that was the thing that we always remembered. And I also remember my grandfather always pushing me in a good way, challenging me, and being supportive, and just always helping me to think through something by reflecting back to me, not necessarily telling me what to do. And when he did tell me what to do, my grandmother was like, leave him alone, he'll figure it out, which is the relationship that they shared. But they taught me so much about being authentic as well. And there's a voicemail that it's like one of the only voicemails that I've saved on my phone. And it's a voicemail of my grandmother just saying like, hey, Charlie, this is your new phone number. You told me to call anytime. And so I'm calling, and give me a call when you have chance. And it's so simple, but just hearing her voice brings back all those memories. And as much as I've grieved and been through, therapy, and I think to your point throughout this entire conversation is that they brought so much joy into my life, and they brought so much love into my life, and I would be doing them a disservice to not talk about them more. And that's really what I took away from today's conversation.
Well,
so thank you.
I love that. And that was beautiful. Thank you for sharing them with me.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I cannot wait to see not only where this journey takes you, but also where writing as an art takes you with all that you've learned throughout this process.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
That's it for today's episode of Turtzed, and we hope you enjoyed the conversation. Do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe or follow button, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. And if today's episode got you thinking, laughing, crying, or maybe even rolling your eyes, write a review and tap to rate. Now let's be real. This convo doesn't end here. Hit us up on socials and don't be shy. Slide into our DMs. We love to connect. Thanks for hanging with us today, and catch you on the next one, because our journey together is just getting started. Remember, stay curious, live authentically, and keep turtzing it up.